morning. My name is Matt Sullivan. I'm the Director of Planning and Development for the town of Wolfeboro. You're joining us for our February Coffee and Connections. We're actually filming right now at the Wolfeboro Community TV studio. We're really happy to be here. I'm joined by Kathy Barnard, the Chair of the Wolfeboro Planning Board. And today we're going to talk to you about the proposed 2019 Planning and Zoning Amendments. The Planning Board has had 2 public hearings to review these zoning amendments. And we're going to talk to you a little bit today about what the amendments are and what the justification is for proceeding with these. I just want to note before we start that if you have any questions about the amendments that you're about to hear about, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at planningdirector@wolfeboronh.us or at 569-5970, and hopefully I can answer any questions you might have. With that, I'm going to pass it off to Kathy to talk about our first proposed zoning amendment, and I'll provide a little background on each of these as we go along as well.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Just to start off with, the Planning Board each year takes a look at the zoning ordinance and any issues that have come up about our existing zoning ordinance and determines if changes should be made. And some of them are just minor changes, others are a little bit more major. But the important thing is that all of these, once the Planning Board has completed their task, is that these then go to the voters, and all of the voters have an opportunity to vote on these zoning changes. And that occurs on town meeting day, which is March 12th of 2019. So anything that you hear us talking about today, if you have concerns about it, you can certainly, as Matt said, call and find out more information, and then you'll have an opportunity to vote yes or no on all of these amendments. This year, we started out with 9 proposed amendments that we needed to hold public hearings on and study some issues. After a public hearing on one of the proposed amendments, which was a change to the zoning map, the Planning Board, after hearing concerns from members of the public, decided to withdraw that. So today we're just going to be talking about 8 proposed amendments to the town's zoning ordinance. One of the changes is a change to our zoning map. 5 of them are changes to various chapters of the ordinance. And then 2 of the items that we'll be discussing are called petition warrant articles. Those are articles that have been submitted by Wolfeboro residents and signed by a certain number of citizens that the citizens feel are things that need to be changed. So they will also be on the ballot. And so let's get started going through the zoning amendment list. As I said, Planning Board has studied these issues and had public discussions, and then 2 public hearings on all of the proposed ordinances where members of the public have had an opportunity to ask questions or express their concerns about the changes. So the first one is the expansion of non-conforming structures. This one is really quite technical, and Matt is going to go through that, but it's a really important issue because there are many non-conforming structures in town, and these are structures that have been in place before the adoption of the zoning ordinance. And so we're trying to clarify what people can do if they want to improve their properties or put additions on, what they can do and what they may need an additional approval in order to do. So go for it, Matt.
Sure. Thank you very much, Kathy. And I just want to note that Kathy and I are going to do our best to summarize these articles today. If you're looking for the full text, you can pick the full text up at our office, the Planning and Development Office, or you can get the full text on the town's website as well for each of these proposed articles. Kathy's right. This is a very technical change that we're proposing to Section 175.43 of the Wolfeboro Planning Ordinance. The existing language in 17543 is very broad, and for that reason it creates problems when it comes not only to staff interpreting the ordinance, but also staff applying it and creating predictable results for people who are applying for building permits and other approvals. So the existing language essentially says that a non-conforming building or structure may be maintained or rebuilt as it existed at the time of the passage of this section, and may by special exception be expanded by no more than 25% of its existing area at that time. So it's a relatively simple statement, but when it comes to sort of the nuances of a lot of what we see for redevelopment on properties, particularly around our waterfront, this can create issues where it's not clear how to proceed with certain projects. As I just sort of covered, the existing ordinance is vague, particularly whether in some cases a variance or a special exception to the Zoning Board of Adjustment are necessary. And I think there's, in that light, an inconsistent history of application of the ordinance to cases, and that's really not the best way to proceed with an ordinance. So we're proceeding with an amendment that I believe creates a consistency and predictability for applicants, as I just noted. And to do that, we're actually adding more specifics and more language to the ordinance. So while it seems like we're complicating the ordinance in a sense, the goal is really to simplify it and make it more predictable for those who are applying for permits. So we're doing a couple of different things. We're distinguishing between what requires a variance, a special exception, and a building permit. We're requiring survey and a variance for any construction that goes further into the setback area on an existing non-conforming structure. We're allowing a total cumulative expansion of 25%, so really in parallel with the old version of the ordinance, but that 25% is based on what portion of the structure is actually non-conforming at that time, not the entirety of the structure. So buildings that are in fully conforming areas of a lot will be allowed to expand in those fully conforming areas and only be restricted based on the non-conforming section of the building. And just a note, that would not include what we're calling appurtenant features, which are things such as decks, stairs, things that are not habitable space within the structure. We're also allowing, this is a critical change, we're allowing by right vertical expansion above an existing non-conforming section of a structure, provided that the applicant goes to the zoning board for a special exception. So there will be a butter notice and a level of review by the town in those cases where vertical expansion is proposed above an existing non-conforming structure. But again, no dimensional expansion. Any proposed construction activity beyond 25%, 50% expansion would require variance to the Zoning Board of Adjustment. And in my opinion, this is consistent with the existing ordinance, but is clarified in the language that we're proposing. We're also just clarifying 3 what I'll call by right activities. These are things that are permitted without any kind of relief from the Zoning Board of Adjustment. These 3 are a bit technical, but I'll quickly review them. One of them is installation of a new foundation or replacement of an existing foundation. We see some structures that require some stabilization or structural reinforcement of foundations or simple replacement. And we want to allow those by right because they can actually result in increased environmental degradation if they're not replaced. So we want to promote installation of new foundations, provided the excavation best practices are respected. We also will continue to allow replacement of structure, provided that the replacement is of the same size as what existed before, so really when no dimensional increase in size is proposed. And we also want to allow removal and replacement of open decks, provided that there's no habitable space added. If a deck is removed and habitable space is added, they would be subject to the prior restrictions that we had in the last slide. So these are really the couple things that we're putting in this ordinance to, yes, increase the size of the ordinance and add more language, but I believe create a more predictable result for people who are applying to our permitting process.
Right, and the planning board spent a lot of time discussing this with Matt, and he brought it to our attention because he's the person that has to issue the permits and guide property owners on what they can do and what they can't do. So it was sort of our job to do some wordsmithing, and we went through quite a few different versions, but when we came down to it, we really feel that this will be a benefit to many property owners and the people that they hire.
Absolutely.
To help them do these projects.
Right.
Okay, after the completion of the public hearing on the non-conforming structure zoning amendment, the planning board recommended positively in favor of sending the item to the warrant, and it was by a 7-0 vote. So all planning board members voted in favor of sending this to the warrant favorably. The next item is called lot line, and it's to do with the front lot line on corner lots. And this is sort of another one of those little technical issues, but in my mind, we're talking about corner lots would have 2 front setbacks, and this sort of affects the streetscape of corner lots in a neighborhood where they would be more consistent with all the properties on a particular street. So it's kind of technical, but the front setbacks are usually more severe, and to take that into account, we've made the corner lots have 2 side setbacks and 2 front setbacks.
Right.
So Matt is going to go through this
Yeah,
amendment.
that's well said about the impact on the streetscape for front setbacks. This is another technical change, I believe, where there's potentially been some inconsistency in application in the past. So the existing language in the ordinance for a corner lot and the way the setbacks are measured is very complicated. And you can see on the slide that we're showing here, I'm not going to review all of it, but it's really somewhat subjective, but where it does try to be specific, I think it creates complications. So the planning board is proposing to simply amend it, particularly for not just corner lots, but those lots that potentially even have 3 fronts. They would all be subject to a front setback, so that streetscape is really reflected and protected, actually. So it also gives those corner lot owners potentially some flexibility. If they are subject to 2 front setbacks, their rear setback would actually be converted into a side setback as well. So that provides some additional flexibility there. So the proposed language is simply to say, for the purposes of building setbacks, all lot lines abutting a street shall be treated as front setbacks with all other lines as side setbacks. Just really simplifying, I think, this section of the ordinance so that it's predictable for property owners when they come in for building permits, what their abilities are on their lot.
And really, the property owner ends up with the same amount of buildable area,
That's right.
which is what's important to people when they're developing their lots. In this particular case, planning board members voted 6 with 1 abstention to pass this item on to the town warrant, and they did that favorably.
Yes.
The next item is on our parking standards. This one is something that is a sort of a small change, but we allowed waivers in our parking requirements, and our town council has told us that that is not consistent with the state statutes and not really allowed. So Matt, why don't you go
Sure.
through that section?
So we've removed the technical language stating that the waiver provision in the zoning ordinance exists, and we've replaced the term waivers with alternatives. So we're still giving some flexibility to the planning board for proposals that don't meet the parking standards, particularly in our downtown. Parking is at a premium. It's difficult to provide for on smaller lots, so we want the planning board to have some ability and some flexibility when looking at the parking standards. So again, the change here is really just to replace the word waiver with alternative, giving the planning board that flexibility. I should also note that there is one minor clarification as well being completed in the ordinance regarding the town attorney's review of parking alternatives, but that's really just a technical clarification that the planning board has been completed.
Okay, and this will be a benefit, I think, because we have so many properties that were adopted or existing conditions that has made it
That's right.
difficult for them to sometimes meet our
Meet the
parking
standard.
standards. So.
Yep, absolutely.
So in this case, the planning board again passed this on to the town warrant favorably with 6 votes in favor and 1 abstention. The next item is another rather small change, but significant change, and that's to the overlay district for affordable nonprofit housing for the elderly and affordable nonprofit workforce housing. Previously, when the ordinance was adopted, it was adopted to just allow 40 affordable units to be built each calendar year. And we have been told that that's inconsistent with the state statutes and needs to be removed from our ordinance. So why don't you go through the issues there?
That's exactly right. So the state statute regarding density and phasing was amended, and the Wolfeboro Planning and Zoning Ordinance was not subsequently amended. So this is a change that we're making to rectify that. What we're doing is removing this language within section 175.27.3. That language states that affordable nonprofit workforce housing projects shall be phased so that town-wide no more than 40 dwelling units shall be permitted in one calendar year. We're essentially proposing to remove that language, particularly in the context of RSA 674-21-4B. And you can see the amendment language listed here, and it essentially says that phased development does not include a general limit on the issuance of building permits, which our existing ordinance did. So as you can see here, the proposed language simply removes that section, so we've removed the cap from the ordinance.
Okay, in this case, the planning board voted 7-0 to recommend to place this on the town warrant. And they were all in favor of the ordinance change. The next one was the Pine Hill Development District boundary adjustment. This is the item that was withdrawn, but I just wanted to mention it because it had been in our legal notices. We had one public hearing on it before the second public hearing, which was held last night. But based on information that we got from property owners and from also neighboring property owners, the planning board, even though they had proposed this change to the zoning map, felt that it really needed much more study and more input from neighboring property owners and the property owners in the Pine Hill Road Development District. So we actually withdrew this amendment, and it will not appear on the warrant.
One thing I also think it's important to note is that many of the comments we heard were related to the fact that the town is currently updating its master plan, and as part of the future land use chapter, zoning changes like this one will be reviewed. So I think one of the comments that we heard is that we should wait for the work of that committee to be completed before proceeding with any significant zoning changes like this proposed one. So I think that the planning board was very diligent in its action.
Yes, right. And one thing that we haven't touched on is that all of the proposed amendments that the planning board works on, they need to determine that these are consistent with the master plan.
That's right.
And so in all cases, we have made that determination. And as you can see from the presentations we've made thus far, some of them are very, very small, and some of them are bringing into conformance with the state statutes. But that certainly is consistent with the master plan.
Yes, absolutely.
And important to the citizens of our community. So the next item is changes to the landscaping section of the regulations, and this really is kind of major in my mind.
Yeah.
Because it's now in the zoning ordinance, which requires if people can't comply with it, they need to go to the zoning board of adjustment to get a change or get a variance. But in reality, many of the properties that want to make improvements, and these are mainly commercial properties,
That's right.
they're all pre-existing, and they want to improve the appearance of their properties, but in some cases really are hampered by these
Yeah.
zoning standards. So we're suggesting that these be taken from the zoning ordinance and put into the site plan regulations.
Yeah, that's really well said, and I think it's really an issue of meeting the letter of the law, and the planning board is recognizing that in these redevelopment cases particularly, which are really the majority of the cases that the planning board sees, the planning board would like to have some flexibility to work with applicants and property owners to improve their properties, but maybe not meet the strict standards that exist in what was part of the zoning ordinance. So what's being proposed at this time is to simply take the existing language in the zoning ordinance and add it directly into the site plan review regulations, thereby granting the ability for the planning board to grant a waiver to those standards. I should note that one of the things that the planning board may choose to do in the future is actually review these standards to ensure that they are appropriate for the town of Wolfeboro, but at this time we're simply seeking to add some flexibility to the process.
Right, and maybe move some of the proposed landscaping to areas that aren't specifically
That's right.
defined.
Yep.
And we would now have the ability to do that, and I think probably would improve the appearance of many commercial
I agree.
properties.
I agree.
So this was, again, forwarded to the town warrant with a favorable vote from all of the members of the planning board. The next item is another one that Matt can go through the
Sure.
why this is before us, but this is actually affecting some properties in the Bay Street Limited Business District, and it's making our map and zoning description consistent.
Yep. The planning board has been focused on completing a comprehensive update to the town's zoning map over the last year. And one of the small discrepancies that we've noticed is that in our Bay Street Limited Business District, which is primarily along Bay Street itself, we have a discrepancy between what the town's zoning map and what the presentation for this zone was when it was adopted and what our zoning description says. And under law, the zoning description takes precedence. So we now have a discrepancy between those two tools that the planning board uses. So what we're proposing here is to simply amend the description to match what our zoning map has said since 2012, I think is the most recent iteration of that map. So what this does is it takes 3 parcels that are on the corner of Pine Hill Road and Bay Street and moves them from their current zoning into the Bay Street Limited Business District as presented on both the zoning map and as part of that presentation that was done at that time. So this is a very minor change that's really for amending a discrepancy.
But could affect a property owner
Sure.
negatively if they were to
Yep.
sell their property
That's
and
right.
someone discovered this inconsistency.
That's
So planning board voted 7-0 to pass this on to the town warrant, and we're all in favor of the change. Okay, now we get to the 2 petition warrant articles. In this case, the planning board has not really had any input in the petition warrant articles. A property owner submitted the 2 changes that we're going to be discussing, but the planning board's role is to hold a public hearing. And so it's an opportunity for people to find out more about the petition warrant article and express their thoughts. And but in this case, whatever is submitted on the petition, the planning board doesn't have any authority, or no one has any authority to change that warrant article.
Correct.
So the first one was an amendment to the Pine Hill Road Development District, and it was going to affect 14 properties along Filterbed Road. And so we had quite a lengthy discussion about this issue at the public hearing. So Matt, why don't you go through the changes?
Yes, so Kathy's exactly right. We had a very well-attended public hearing on this petition warrant article. In this case, all of those affected, which for the purposes of notice were those properties within 100 feet, were individually noticed, and we got an excellent turnout of folks to talk about this petition with the planning board. The sort of basis of the petition, or what it's trying to do, is take these existing properties and rezone them from what is currently residential zoning to the Pine Hill Road Development District. To sort of characterize that district, it's really the heaviest commercial use district that the town of Wolfeboro currently has in place. It allows, by special exception, uses like industry, kennels, contractors' yards, and even the permitted uses are sort of focused on industrial activities and fabrication. So it is a relatively intense commercial zone. The parcels that that were identified by the petitioner are a mix of uses. Really, the parcels on the southern side of this are residential in character that are currently occupied by either single-family homes or some mixture of that. There are a few commercial properties in the southern portion. Some of you may know that one of these properties is the former Kimball Sawmill on the western side of Filterbed Road. And then on the eastern side of Filterbed Road, we do have a construction company as well. I should note that the map that you see on the screen here does not include one portion, and that is that you see the two orange zones identified here. These are outlined the parcels in the petition. There's also a 100-foot strip that runs along the western side of Filterbed Road on the town of Wolfeboro's wastewater treatment plant property. That connects those two islanded portions of property, if you will. The feedback that was received as part of the public hearing was relatively, it was concerned about this petition. Additionally, the planning board had received some written comment prior to the meeting, which was a mixture of support and concern about the proposal. Ultimately, the planning board held a hearing that lasted about an hour and a half, I believe, in total length, and the planning board unanimously voted not to recommend this particular petition to the warrant. As Kathy mentioned, regardless of the planning board's vote, these petitions move on as presented to the warrant. So you'll see this on the ballot. One thing I do want to note is there was a technical discrepancy noted in the petition. The petition noted that these parcels were currently in the rural residential district when in fact they're in the residential district. So we have identified that technical issue that could create a problem should the petition ultimately be passed.
Right, but and just to restate what you just mentioned, we did receive we received quite a number of negative comments, but also some people that favored doing something with this area, and actually the area I think is sort of an area that the planning board needs to look at and figure out, are there ways to develop the properties. Maybe have more of a transitional zone in order to address the concerns of the residential property owners, because in some cases people had just recently remodeled properties in that neighborhood, and they were really quite taken back because they didn't know about this until our public notice appeared in the paper, I think, and so they really didn't, they were sort of taken by surprise. So the planning board in their discussions really felt that we will need to look at this area in the future. We're looking now at our master plan, and this would sort of fit into the update of the master plan and see if there is some sort of a zoning change that we might want to consider.
Sure.
But that when the planning board undertakes a project like that, we try to get as much input as possible so that we can address the concerns that people might have ahead of time, rather than have people surprised. But as Matt said, the planning board did made an unfavorable recommendation that would, and you'll see that on the town warrant when you go to vote. So, and then the next petition warrant article has to do with business directional signs. And this one is a project that the planning board had appointed what we call the wayfinding sign committee that's been meeting for quite some time now to try to come to grips with this issue of business directional signs, and we want to make sure that whatever recommendations we have, that it will give all business owners an equal opportunity to participate in the program. So the Wayfinding Sign Committee is still studying the issue, but and so the petition warrant article was submitted because I think that some folks thought that we had been at that project
a bit too long.
a bit too long,
Yeah.
and that may be the case, but we found that it's much more complicated than we had originally thought. We have to concern ourselves with what kind of signage we put on the public right-of-way, the cost of maintenance, and a lot of things of that nature.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, well, I think that's a great way to describe what the process has been thus far. I'd also like to mention that the Wayfinding Sign Committee did generate a sort of progress report from their work, and we will post that progress report to the town's website along with these warrant articles, just so you have access to that. The petition itself, though, really proposed 3 primary changes to the existing business directional sign ordinance in section 175-44E. And those 3 you can see indicated on the slide here. So it took the existing language and then broadened it to include additional signage on private property, which is a critical change. Sort of anywhere on private property is a critical change from our current ordinance, which really only allows it in the town right-of-way and certain setback areas. Additionally, it added language limiting the signs to 1 pair mounted back-to-back on a single post at each intersection where travelers must change the direction, and then added some specific language about a maximum of 2 pair per business within the town, with the review authority being taken from the Public Works Director and then being provided to the Code Enforcement Officer. So those were the substantive changes within the petition warrant article. There were some technical issues discussed as part of the public hearing that could potentially arise should the petition pass. But again, I think this petition signals the need for this project to sort of be finished. I think the planning board recognizes that and potentially the need to meet with the selectmen on the issue. But ultimately, the planning board voted not to recommend this petition just because it didn't necessarily address all the issues that had been identified by the Wayfinding Sign Committee.
yes, that's true, and I do think that the committee needs to come to some conclusions, and but this really this petition warrant article goes much beyond what the committee has really focused on and what we were asked to focus on. We were asked to just focus on the greater downtown area for pedestrian wayfinding signs, and this warrant article would allow signs throughout the town.
Right.
On public, in the public right-of-way and on private property, and so that was really the issue, that the reason why the planning board did not recommend.
And additionally, that, as you just said, that these were really vehicle-oriented signs, not pedestrian-oriented signs, which was really the original intent of the wayfinding sign program, really for visitors in the downtown area who were walking around and needed to find local vendors. This was really, I think this petition was recognized as being inconsistent with that original purpose of the committee.
Yes, it certainly was. So those are all the items that are going to appear on the town warrant, but I did want to just mention that the planning board is also updating its master plan. So next year, when we come back, we'll probably have some items to discuss that are being recommended in the updated master plan. The master plan has really been a really great process this time, with committees for each chapter, and they've been very engaged committees that are coming out with some really interesting recommendations. And so the public process for that project is about to start, or will start this spring, and people will have an opportunity to hear a presentation on the various chapters and make comments, and possibly changes may very well be made after the public hearing. In many cases,
Yep.
probably that will be the situation. So, Planning Board has not only worked on all of these warrant articles, but has also been very busy, all of the Planning Board members chairing the various committees, and so we hope to have a really good, usable master plan.
I
when
think
this
we'll be
is all
busy for the
done.
next 10 years,
Yes,
so we'll have
yes,
plenty to do.
yes, I think so. So, everybody, don't forget to get out and vote on town meeting day on March 12th.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to Wolfeboro Community TV, obviously, for hosting us for yet another Coffee and Connections. If you have any questions about these, again, please feel free to reach out to me at my office, 569-5970, or planning director at wolfeboronh.us, and we'll see you next month. Thank you.